Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Aspire 32. And in today's podcast, we have another important topic to discuss, which can be an option for undergraduates or even postgraduates who want to study abroad and maybe find an option with that degree to settle maybe in any other part of the world or in the United States. And for this podcast, we have Dr. Sanvriti Manjrekar, who finished her master's in clinical research from Massachusetts, and she is here to explain about all these important aspects for applying to this program in the United States. Welcome to Aspire 32, Dr. Sanvriti. It is amazing to have you on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. Greatly appreciate the work you're doing with this channel. Really wish there was something out there around 7 years ago when I was applying to grad schools. So thank you so much for having me today.
I truly understand the situation because I have been in that situation for many times when I, planned to apply for NBDA and all. But the topic which you're discussing, you are mentioning today is something different, and I have never heard about it because we have done the podcast on MPH, DDS. But what exactly is this clinical research program which one can, and why they can apply for this course in United States?
Generally, MPH, for people who do not want to go with a clinical route post PDS, MPH is the most common pathway that a lot of students take, and the curriculum is great. However, clinical research is a different branch of sciences that students from science backgrounds, especially dentistry, can definitely go into. It's a very upcoming field, and the clinical expertise that we come from is greatly appreciated in the field as such. So it opens a new range of doors for people, which can, be explored further. Predominantly, it just gives students an aid to either conduct or monitor clinical trials, really, either in a preclinical or a clinical setting, or even in post-market clinical settings. So that's pretty much the gist of what clinical research is all about.
Is it very similar to MPH, or what are the major differences between the MPH program and this? Because when we did the podcast on MPH, they also did mention about the statistics part, and then you can go ahead and excel more in the specific biostatistics and all. So how again, in simple terms, how different, what is the curriculum in this clinical research program?
So there are definitely a lot of similarities between the public health program and the clinical research program. The most common point of conjunction comes in with the statistics part, as you were mentioning. We have a whole range of basic statistics to advanced level programs embedded within the curriculum. The difference for clinical research comes in, it can be divided into three parts basically. The first part is understanding research methodology and how to develop research methodology. The second part is your statistics, looking at data, like collecting data or maintaining data, and then the analysis of data using statistical tools. And the third part, which again is the most differentiating part probably, is the embedded part of regulatory affairs, wherein you've conducted clinical trials and your product is in the market now. You have to demonstrate continued safety, efficacy, or safety and performance, and your product has to conform to certain regulatory requirements set by the region that you're marketing it in. So there's a lot of regulatory affairs taught in as well in the program. So pretty much the common point between MPH and clinical research would be the stats, and everything else is then separated out.
So what is the usual process for applying to this course? Like, for example, MPH, I believe there is a centralized application process. For DDS, there is CAPIT. For residency program, there is ADA pass, route. And what is the process for this?
So there isn't a standard common application program like the SOFAs. You have to individually apply to each school that you're looking at for and adhere to their specific requirements. Predominantly, it does not differ from the usual requirements that are available for applications in the US. So you need your transcripts, your 3 letters of recommendation, a statement of purpose, all your scores, TOEFL, GRE. Sometimes you might have to send in like a proposal of your research, what you're interested in or what you're looking to conduct. That can be determined by always speaking or connecting with professors beforehand your application process. Um, and then that moves on to an interview phase. Like post your application is accepted, you might have an interview with the panel and have a discussion of what research work you've done in the past, where your interest really lies, and what you're really looking for to achieve in your graduate program.
So this whole process of applying, how much time does it take?
So it takes you a good year at least. It took me about 8 to 12 months, anywhere between 8 to 12 months when I was applying. Well, if you start really early on, and I could say it took me longer because I was quite unprepared for the most part. But if you really start early on during your internship, for example, you get your transcripts in place, get your letters of recommendation in place, and everything. You can bring that application process down to 6 months only, which is a good target time. I think the most time consuming factor that can come in is probably zeroing in on a specific interest um, of research. Maybe with, if you have interviews for the program, you have to talk about that a little bit. Or if you want to zero in on a research mentor, you have to give out information. You'll have to talk to them about your research interests. So nailing that down takes a little bit of time and a lot of studying. So you just have to prepare on the aspects that you're sort of leaning for.
That was quite informative. And of course, there is one question which is there in my mind, because I have seen always people thinking about, as an intern, when we interact with the students at our institute, that either they are thinking of MPH or DDS. I'm curious to know that how did you find the information about this clinical course in foreign countries, because nobody in my institute till now has told me about this course.
I actively started looking at grad schools in the US in my internship. And the most and I was very clear in my head that I did not want to go the clinical route. I knew that I did not want to pursue DDS or appear for NBD at all. So the most common thing that everyone did was go to MPH, which the program is great. I looked at a lot of schools, but as I was looking at the curriculum and sort of trying to design and tailor my application for the program, I was thinking in my head that a lot of times um, you know, the whole aspect of being in US boils down to your visa. And I thought, okay, what if, I ever want to relocate back to India or somewhere else? And I've learned about all these public health policies, which may or may not be applicable in a different country, given um, you know, given the multidisciplinary factors that lie, right? So I was looking for something that could have a more global approach, irrespective of where my geographical location is. Like for example, right now I'm based out of India predominantly, but my work does not confer to just being within India or anything. I'm predominantly working for in the EU region or in the US region. So I wanted something that would break out of those boundaries, and my search sort of led me one thing into another, and that's how I came up with this program. I bumped into this program, and as I kept reading more and more about the curriculum and reading a lot more information about the core research activities that were happening at the university, it gave me more confidence that, okay, this is probably what I want to do and pursue further.
What is the fees for this course in US dollars, or if you can, convert it to Indian rupees? How much does
So,
it total, including the expenses, maybe?
so just the tuition fee was around 40,000 US dollars, which, if I convert, roughly comes down to 20 or lakhs, I believe. There are great sources for student loans available. There are a lot of scholarships and graduate assistantships for students available that they can pursue which helps them to sort of either lower the tuition fee or skip, like get, like not have to pay the tuition fee. Living expenses, again, as a very standard response, really depends upon which city and which state you're sort of living in. I was in Boston, and I was mostly located in like downtown Boston, which is predominantly expensive when compared to a state like Texas, or North Carolina, let's say, right? So that really depends. Boston's pretty much expensive, but your graduate assistantships really help students out to
when
get
when
through.
you convert something in US dollars, Indian
Yeah,
rupees to US dollars, it is always expensive, and I can understand that. Then how?
very.
So maybe, yeah. So 40,000 US dollars and the additional expenses. So this course runs for 1 year, 2 year. What is the duration of it?
It's a 2-year program. It If you're going, so there are two tracks that my university at MCPHS was offering. One was the thesis track, and the second one was a capstone track. If you take your thesis route, you have to do 2 years of mandatory course. Depending on if you get your research results faster, you graduate within 2 years. If not, you have to extend it to 2.5 to 3 years, or so on. The capstone is a miniature version of a thesis. You're actually not conducting something, but you're providing like a sample of your research. Really, that if you're doing that, you can graduate in like 1.5 years as well. So if the more number of courses you take, the faster you graduate. There's that flexibility available with the course itself.
Do you need F1 visa for the study purpose? Of course, I think that is mandatory
Yeah.
for to be in this dental or any schools of the United States.
Yeah, you have to apply for an F1 visa. However, if you're in the US because of other reasons, then you can always study part time in grad schools on that particular visa as well. So pretty much, if you're
Okay.
traveling from India or anywhere else to the US to pursue a full time course, you would definitely need to have an F1 visa.
So after listening to your conversation, it feels like it is somewhat like a PhD program where you have to have a research topic, you have to send it to them, and maybe they will evaluate. I don't know whether the funding, you said, okay, the funding may, it depends on individual, and that course is very similar like a PhD course. It is more about research. So of course, after you finish that, because we know that currently the main reason for any students who plan to go to United States after dentistry in India is basically to settle down in United States. They don't, although there are so many certificate courses which may teach them so many different things in dentistry, or maybe some different things in other aspects, but they predominantly go for the residency or MPH, which can ultimately help them to get a visa, H1B visa, or maybe to settle down as a citizen. Do you have that path with this course?
Yeah, very much. So after you complete your graduation, you get your OPT for 1 year, right? If you don't want, so post graduation, you can start looking for jobs. Again, you can look for jobs either in preclinical phases or clinical data management, clinical research associate positions. A lot of us move into medical writing positions. Now, once you get a job, it leads you down to the H1B process, which is again a whole lottery system and a whole different ball game altogether, which moves away from it's kind of luck based, also kind of a little bit depending upon where you're at really. So you definitely have an option of settling down because it leads you to so many job opportunities that you can apply for. Uh, I'm probably the outlier who decided to pack my bags and move across. But I understand a lot of students, put so much at risk and decide to move and want to have that, want to build a life there, right? It's completely valid. And the path obviously exists. Like so many other students that I've studied with in my, all my colleagues that I've worked with are living there and have that career path for themselves.
So is it easy to get a H1B visa sponsored? Like what exactly they are supposed to look after the course? is it like an academic job, or maybe it is like full time, you have to go into this research maybe in a university, or continue? What other option do they have once they finish this course?
You can either go into academic research. So a lot of academic universities have research labs, and you can become a research associate with them. And the path to H1B, you through a research associate path, so with an academic lab, depends on the grant they have, depends on the amount of funding they have really to sponsor your work visa. Your chances are always better with a pharmaceutical or a medical device company. They just have a lot more money and are more willing to sponsor graduates with the right skill sets required for them and to get their job done really. So if you're a research associate, with a pharmaceutical company or any device manufacturer, that part just gets a lot more easier. And mostly people tend to do that unless you get sponsored. Like for example, if you're doing your thesis with your research lab, and that sort of gets extended, then you get lucky. If you get funding, you get lucky. So you go on a whole different path with visa. But yeah, definitely being in the more corporate zone gives you better chance at an H1B visa.
What is the path you have chosen after the course? What is your daily routine like?
I really wanted to be in academic research, but once my thesis and all got wrapped up, and I was almost done with my grad school, I had this. I realized that the kind of work I want to pursue. So I wanted to get into medical writing, specifically with regulatory affairs. I got lucky because the kind of work I was getting did not stop me geographically. My So I work in medical device regulatory affairs now, and I work specifically with European regulatory affairs. So once I got my job, I realized I don't have to sort of geographically be confined and uh, live in the United States only. So I actively made a decision to move, and I was very lucky to have a good boss who sort of didn't really care about it. So I moved back to India. I work mostly with European clients, and I end up paying a lot in taxes. That's the sad part. But it's I think if there's anything that we've learned from the pandemic is that your work no longer has boundaries in terms of geographical locations, right? So that's been a plus point definitely, and that's something that students have to be very pragmatic about what they're getting into it at any point of time.
If given an option to apply for this course again, is there anything which you would have done differently? Maybe you had done some mistakes and that's why your application, maybe progress for a longer duration. Is there anything which you would like to change?
There are two very specific things that I would have wanted to do. One was I would have really wished I learned some preclinical lab work. I had to read, like, at some point in my grad school, I was doing Western blots and ELISAs, and it took me so long to learn. And what I realized is that at an undergrad level, my university, I had the option to really take an interest and learn those in the lab, and I didn't. And these are some very basic skill sets that even though dentists, we're all clinicians at the end of the day, these are basic skill sets that we could have and that could help. Right, dental research is exploding in a way that we never really thought. So I think that's something that I really would have wanted to do. The second thing, which now in retrospect is not mandatory, I think that comes very naturally, is sort of invest in more courses, like maybe like understanding of writing, right? Like just building on those things. I did a lot of research. I participated in some research activities and writing during my undergrad years, which definitely helped. And I directly moved to, like applying for grad schools. I wished if I was more aware of like certificate courses, I would have grabbed those maybe during my undergrad years. I did not invest in that, but these were the two things that I really sort of wished I would have looked more into.
There are many times people are not aware about the future options. The course may look really promising. For example, when we did the podcast of the MPH, she told me that she was very clear that she want to continue studying the MPH and further aspects. But there are few people who do the uh, MPH and then go to the DDS. So which, looking at the end point, which kind of students, because you are saying that there is research involved, there is also regulatory affairs, you are involved in writing a lot of information, which kind of student should actually go into this course?
So if you're, for example, if you're in the clinical research program, right? Given how the curriculum is divided into three phases, one is the research methodology, the second is your statistical data analysis, and third part comes to your regulatory affairs, right? I think somewhere as a student, after 6 months, you should have an idea of where you sort of fit in or where you want to go, what route you really want to take. If that doesn't span out, that's still okay, because your core curriculum sort of prepares you a little bit for everything, right? So there's nothing to panic. You have the skill sets to sort of build on as you go about. When it comes very specifically to, let's say, regulatory affairs, right? More than legal requirements, it's using your clinical knowledge to conform to a regulatory guideline a particular country's regulatory body has set out. So you're assessing heavy clinical data, and against the regulatory bodies rules and regulations and so on, and then conforming to your product safety and efficacy really. So it's more scientific than people consider it to be legal, right? There is a lot of scope because, like, for example, I work with very interesting devices on a regular basis that keeps it more interesting. You're not working on the same topic for years and years and years together. Your device changes, so it keeps it intriguing. I think that's what called me into the field and kept me interested for longer. That okay, for 6 months I'm working on one device, and then there is another device, and so on. Some people want to dedicate their entire life to just one research topic, and that's very fair enough. And if that's their calling, they should stay more in academic research, or in a research lab, a pharmaceutical research lab, and work towards the development on that angle. I wanted something that was mildly living off of the edge, I believe, if that's what I can say. So I ended up in this path. What kind of student? I think if you want to, I think the answer comes down to, if you want to keep working with new things on a more frequent basis, and if you're looking for something that just intrigues your brain every 6 months, then this is probably the route. Yeah. There's a lot of learning again and again. Like, there's no day that I will log into work and feel like, okay, there's nothing new to see here, right? So if it intrigues you, then this is definitely a good path for you.
Quite informative, and I think those were really good words. And I'm sure the students who are looking for this course, I think those will be really informative guidelines for them. One last question, obviously, which everybody thinks of when they complete the course. What is the, on an average, what can be their income, maybe in United States? I know that the values may differ when you convert and all, but suppose they settle in United States, how much earning they may expect from it, if they just do that, or maybe one or two advanced courses after that?
So I think I would prefer to answer that with a per hour rate, because that's predominantly how jobs are laid out in the US. For being in regulatory affairs, if you have the skill sets that the company is looking for, especially for the work that I'm involved in and my team is involved in right now, the base starting was about $55 per hour. This was back in 2018. So multiply that into 40 hours a week for 4 weeks of the month. And then you have a lot of tax that you pay depending on where you're living and so on. So that's pretty much the standard base that you start off of. Again, there are several branches within regulatory affairs. Let's say right? That can range all the way, and the more experience you get, the more you get to pay, the more you get paid. Also, then there are different aspects, like if you're in data analysis, you get paid differently and so on. So that's the base that you can set yourself off. So definitely you can pay back student loans when you're getting to it, I would say so.
Okay, I have last two questions. One question is, what was that one single quality which you learned in institute or maybe in India which helped you in United States during your course?
My university was a great polishing school. I think the way you conduct yourself, the way you present, the way you articulate your thoughts, um, that really formed the basis of what I've come to. Even though I was not great at clinical dentistry, it gave me the confidence that I could really do something with the knowledge that I'm gaining, right? So that I'm very glad for, with the professors that I learned and moved away from. So very grateful to KLE for that.
I'm
Great
sure
polishing.
the institute would be really, the KLE Wiki Institute of Dental Sciences would be happy to hear this. What is your concluding message to the students who are listening to this podcast and thinking of applying for this course after their undergraduation or maybe even post-graduation?
I would say that research is it's kind of fulfilling in its own sense, because you are on this path of like gaining information and so on, right? Um, Sometimes people just obsess over it also, that, okay, we have to, like, they'll just obsess over living or of a dream or sorts, right? But it's predominantly a very fulfilling career. And the one thing that I would tell students is to sort of stay intrigued, utilize the skills that you're learning in your undergrad, like build on those. They really help you far more in your career than you think. It goes beyond your grad school life, it goes way into your career. The second thing is that, especially given the pandemic and everything, right? As I was telling, that there are far lesser boundaries for work. Your career could just take you anywhere, and it could explode in any particular part of the world, and that's a good sign. So definitely take on that and build as much as you can, right? So find it's very necessary to sort of gauge an insight, or like gauge an insight of what you're really passionate about, and just follow through, really.
Those were really amazing words for the conclusion, and I want to thank you, Dr. Sanvriti, for giving me your time and sharing your valuable experience and guiding the viewers of Aspire 32 to choose this another option which they can apply after their undergraduation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Dear viewers, if you like this podcast, do mention into the comment section. If you have any doubts, you can always subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends if you think it will be helpful for them. Bye for now.